are repositories of that wisdom, and I think it's up to your generation, and I think members of religious groups, and there are also many secular groups that can do it too, have the potential to lead to an awakening of basic human decency. So those are my hopes for you.
Yeah, I would say it's got to be local, it's got to be personal.
Yes.
The interaction I just had with the guy who just asked me about evil and suffering, that was, he was good. He was respectful. You know, I had to be kind of brief. If we were actually sitting down and even had 15 minutes together, it would have been a vastly better interaction. Because it's something I used to do in marriage counseling. I'm so glad I don't do marriage counseling anymore. It was very draining. But let me tell you, when things were really bad between two people, there was almost a trick. It was basically a method. And I would say, here's the husband, here's the wife, they're talking to each other, and they're just yelling at each other. At a certain point, you say, okay, when the husband has just said something to the wife, before the wife responds, the wife has got to restate as best as possible what the husband just said. And you've got to say it until the husband says, I couldn't have said it better myself. That's what I meant. Put it in your own words. And so, in other words, it took forever to have a conversation this way. But when the person said something to you, you had to restate what you thought they just said to the place where they said, that's exactly what I meant. In fact, you said it a little better than I just said it. And then you could respond to that. Now, actually, that's actually a very, very good thing to do. Get people together. Say, we're going to meet together monthly. We're going to meet together weekly. We have very, very different views. We're going to listen to each other. We're going to do something like that where we actually say, I've listened to you. This is what I think I hear you saying. To the place where the other person says, yep, that's what I meant. You said it as well as I could. Then you could go ahead and critique. It slows it down, but do it. And I think you will learn tolerance, you will learn humility, you will learn patience with each other. It can't be done in the courts, it can't be done in the social media, it can't be done actually even in this room that much, even though we're both urging you all to do it, and I actually sense that we're doing something really good here tonight, really good. Nevertheless, to actually do it means around tables with people with different moral frameworks and moral visions who actually are willing to say, for the next number of months or weeks, we're going to get together, get to know each other, and really do this, hearing each other, listening to each other, restating each other's points of view, and then critiquing. And trying as much as possible, when you do try to convince the other person, going inside their moral framework, respecting it, and trying to help them understand. If you're going to change their mind, try to change their mind inside their framework, because that's the only possible way the person's going to make any move anyway.
We also received several questions around identity. So some of you asked for elaboration on identity politics, and also with the comment about the fragility of our identities. What are some factors that have led to this greater fragility in the American identity? And what are positive and negatives around identity politics? So maybe, Tim, you start with this one.
I better start because I mentioned it, and I can just elaborate on the reference I already made. I'm sure John has way more to say about this than I do. But Charles Taylor, Canadian philosopher, did a series of lectures quite a number of years ago that in this country they're called The Ethics of Authenticity. It's a Harvard University Press book. He talked about the fact that in traditional societies, I'm wondering what a social psychologist thinks of this, in traditional societies you kind of went outside to find out who you were. You went to your parents, you went to your tribe, you went outside to find your social role. And they said, and they told you, if you're going to be a good person, this is who you have to be. So you go outside to find out who you are, and then you come back in and reorder your life in accord with it. So generally, in the past, you knew, who am I? I'm a father, I'm a husband, I am a son, I am a grandfather. In other words, your family roles were who you were. So you went outside to find your family roles, and you came in to reorder your life. Taylor says, today we're told you go inside and you don't talk to anybody else. You go inside, you look at your deepest feelings, and you decide who you are. So you don't let anybody else tell you who you are. You decide who you are. Well, he says that naturally means that when then you come out and you need all kinds of recognition. I have to say it's smothering to come from a society in which essentially your meaning in life is found by pleasing your parents, and that's basically your identity, is to please your parents. That can be suffocating, but on the other hand, as long as your parents like you, and they think you're good, your identity is secure. But if you go inside and decide who you are without any reference, Gail Sheehy in the book Passages years ago said, you go inside and you don't ask anybody else and you decide who you are. Then when you come out, you need all kinds of affirmation from everybody, and you demand recognition. And Taylor, this feel persuasive to me. Taylor says, as a result, a lot of modern identity is just more fragile, and we get very upset when somebody doesn't validate us. Whereas in the past, we were smothered by what our parents said or what our tribe said, but at least we knew who we were because, and we didn't need everybody in the world telling us who we were.
So I'd like to address the topic of sort of identity politics as we experience it on campus now, and why is there a big debate over it? And as far as I can tell, there's two very different kinds of identity politics, and this is what causes the confusion. If it's the case that black people are not allowed to eat in certain restaurants or drink at water fountains, and you organize a march against that, yes, in a sense it's identity politics in that it's saying there is racial injustice, there's a clear violation, and we're going to get people together and use the political system and have rallies and marches, and we're going to change that. Now that's fighting for justice. And that's the kind of, if you want to call that identity politics or politics about an identity group, that's one that most Americans support. I certainly do. And all the people who argue against identity politics support that. But then there's some new ideas that were nurtured in the 1990s in particular about privilege and matrices of oppression that are training young people to do a couple things that I think is very bad for them and for society. So one is we're training young people to see people in terms of their categories. And I think this is just the wrong thing to do. So if we should be reducing the degree to which we see each other as members of a category. And so we're hypersensitizing this tribal instinct, which is trouble to begin with. And then we're teaching people to find ever smaller amounts of injustice wherever they can so that they're in a perpetual state of outrage. And we're teaching them then that America is an eternally racist, homophobic, et cetera, nation. Now, it's never perfect, but boy, are things getting better. Decade by decade, things are getting amazingly better. But many young people don't seem to know that because they're taught that the racism and the other problems are so deep. And so this is the kind of identity politics that I find alarming, which is where these tribal creatures that are not good at finding the truth, where once we're emotional, we're able to, we accept the reasons for that and we attack the other side. And so I see the kind of identity politics that is not about solving injustice and being magnanimous and loving towards your enemies, but rather is about getting people perpetually in a state of anger and outrage, and then demonizing your opponents. And where we see this, where I'm finding this in the intellectual debate, is when I have made arguments about the bad effects of a culture of protecting young people, in the Coddling the American Mind article, there's been almost no argument that has engaged with what I said. Most of the argument online has been, oh, well, you're a white male. Of course, you're protecting your privilege. In other words, identity politics has become a way that young people are taught to not engage in arguments where you can win or lose. It's a way of invalidating your opponent by linking them usually to racism. So Mark Lilla had this really powerful essay in the New York Times, and one of his Columbia colleagues wrote right back in some major journal, I can't remember how she put it, but she basically linked him to you take off his, basically he's a KKK, he's like something, and as he says, this is a slur, not an argument. So I'm afraid that identity politics is teaching young people at our top universities to make slurs, and it's preventing them from learning how to make the kinds of arguments that are needed.